Hello, and welcome to our third and final series in Advancing Early Childhood Education Outdoors Now. I would like to introduce Liz Williams from the Kippawonga community in the far northern BC. Her Gitksen name is Hamolick. Liz, would you like to welcome everyone here?
Mahifilk, everyone. My name is Liz Williams. I come from the community of Gitwangach. I am a Gitksen. We have approximately 6 communities within the Gitksen Nation that are spread out within the north. And I can welcome you to the Gitksen territory this morning as a Gitksen person, and I'm also from the Nuchanuhl Nation. And I'm looking forward to all of the discussions and sharing this morning. So welcome all to the, on behalf of the Gitksen territories.
Thank you, Liz, for your beautiful message. Today, I am speaking to you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Nation, where they've been caring for the land since time immemorial. My name is Belva Stone, and I'm an outdoor early childhood educator. I'm a part of a small but mighty group of dedicated folks who have been working feverishly behind the scenes to put these roundtables together. Hartley Bannock, lecturer at UBC, Iris Berger, assistant professor at UBC, Mariana Brussoni, associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics and the School of Population and Public Health at UBC, Enid Elliott, professor of Camosun College and University of Victoria, Kaylee Hershey, graduate student and researcher from UBC, and our champion, Shelley MacClure, regional manager at Island Health. So a little housekeeping. We're encouraging everyone to ask questions via the chat box or the question and answer box at the bottom of the screen. We'll be monitoring these throughout and compiling questions to pose at the end of our session. I'd also like to draw everyone's attention to our background document. If you head to our little website, we'll pop it up into the chat box. It's the second bullet point under the heading Ways to Participate. This document offers a succinct overview of what we've been working on in advancing early childhood education outside now. There's some links, save it to your computer, look at it now, or look at it later. Last week, we heard from panelists who showed us what was already happening in their corners of the world. Mads Bowling, a research fellow in Denmark, spoke about the Daycare Act 2018 that requires educators to get outside more. Aaron Bookman, a lawyer and partner at Carfer Lawton LLP, spoke to the legal side of things. And he gave us a perspective from a lawyer's view. He offered us a reassuring voice that outdoor education can happen. And he helped us to unpack liability and show us how a lawyer would view different scenarios. Danielle Alphonse from the Aboriginal Early Child Development in Vancouver Island gave us an ecological Indigenous perspective, reinforcing 3 key points of being outside: building attachment to the land, sustainability in relationship to children, feeling connected, as well as understanding their role to supporting the environment, and finally, spiritual development in relationship to land, ocean, and plants. And finally, we had Eliza Yair, program specialist for the Outdoor Preschool Pilot Program in Washington. She showed us all that licensing outdoor education is possible, for they've done it in Washington. And this can be done with a healthy relationship between health and education authorities. The title of today's roundtable is What's Next? So I'm going to put forward a question to all of our attendees today to think about as we go through. How can we move licensing outdoor education in BC forward? What kind of support do we need to agitate for change? What does that look like? What do you need from us? As we learned from Eliza, this is a collaborative effort that takes many of us to work together to create, and this is doable. We invite all of you attendees to share your thoughts, questions, suggestions in our chat box as well. We will be compiling these. Over my 20-year-long career of working with children, I have always found that they thrive outside, rain or shine. Life is just better outside. After many years of working in an indoor preschool, I jumped at the opportunity to work in an outdoor program. This outdoor program happened in various city parks throughout Vancouver, and you know what? It worked. Children were safe, they were happy, and they truly blossomed while in the care of Mother Nature. And over the years of being an outdoor educator, I've often had experiences where children were struggling in an indoor program, and then they would come and join me outside, and they would thrive. Their behaviors went from an 11 inside to a 4 outside. The change in environment helped to shift their reactions, thereby decreasing their negative behaviors. It's very powerful. Throughout my time as an outdoor educator, I saw a huge need for outdoor programs in East Van. So in 2017, I started my own company, Muddy Boot Prints, that focused on half-day outdoor programs for children aged 2.5 to 6. 4 years later, Muddy Boot Prints is bursting at the seams with 4 programs. I started with 2. Pre-COVID, I would receive a few emails a week asking to be added to my waitlist. Since May of this year, I receive a few emails a day. I'm not alone in this. All outdoor programs in British Columbia are seeing a similar surge in interest, and we can't keep up. You know, 3 weeks before we began the school year this year, I opened a new program only to waitlisted families, and it sold out in 15 minutes. Within 20 minutes, I had a wait list. British Columbian parents want outdoor education, and many of our long-standing outdoor programs are unable to meet these needs. Over the last few months, I've been contacted by many curious people wanting to know how to start their own outdoor programs. Sure, that's fun. We can take it to a park. So then I talked to them about risk assessment, safety management, risk-benefit assessment. And the line goes very quiet on the other end. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. So then I spend time telling them about them, teaching them about it, and offering other safety strategies that I utilize every day in hopes of setting them up for success. And that's the best that I can do. I return once more to the question that I posed earlier. How can we move licensing outdoor education in BC forward? How can we answer the parents' cries of need and offer a provincial framework for educators and curious people to work in so that they can create a safe and healthy outdoor program for children? In our first session, the territorial welcome was offered by Musqueam Nation Morgan Guerin. He taught us that just before entering into a big house, there's a nail hanging outside the door. And on that nail, you hang up everything you thought you knew. And you go into the big house, and together you come away with a consensus. Today, I invite all of us to hang up what we thought we knew on that nail and listen with an open heart and an open mind. And as he says, you can pick up what you left on the nail if you want, or you can leave it there for 4 days, and after 4 days, it's gone. I would like to now turn things over to our caring, compassionate moderator that has been fearlessly leading the charge for us these last 2 sessions, Ellen Kelsey. Ellen, thank you.
Thank you so much, Belva. Beautiful words, and thank you for your emphasis on this third roundtable as a place of action forward. Really appreciate that. I'm very happy to be joining you from the traditional territory of the WSÁNEĆ and to introduce you to our 4 panelists for this morning. We have Mariana Brussoni, who is an associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics and the School of Population and Public Health at the University of British Columbia. We have Tricia Edgar, who is co-founder and director of Fresh Air Learning, British Columbia. We have Shelley MacClure, who is the regional manager of community care facilities licensing at Island Health in British Columbia. And we have Liz Williams-Hamolick, First Nations Pedagogy Network, Daycare Manager, Language Nest, and the principal of the primary school, British Columbia. Thank you so much for joining us, panelists. And I'd love to start right in, if it's all right with the 4 of you. I'll start with you, Mariana, with our question, which is, what 3 key insights could you share to make a case for what outdoor early childhood education looks like in your context, and why it is so urgently needed in this time of COVID-19?
Thanks very much, Ellen. It's my pleasure to be here amongst this panel. I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And I'm the researcher in this group of panelists. So my research focuses on injury prevention and outdoor play. And what I've learned through my 2 decades of work would be actually rather intuitive to any child enjoying outdoor play, and relates to the first insight that I want to share with you, that outdoor play is fundamentally different from play indoors and offers different benefits to children's health, development, and well-being. So many of us can remember a favorite childhood play memory of playing outside. And if we think back to why that was so important to us, we may remember a sense of freedom, of fun, of being able to run and jump and shout and decide for ourselves what we want to do and how we want to do it. And these are the kinds of experiences that are much harder to get indoors. And it turns out that they're critical for children's health and development in many areas, such as socio-emotional learning, cognitive development, and physical health. We know, for example, that when children are playing outdoors, they're more physically active and less sedentary than when they're indoors. In my own work, I've strived to understand the challenges that exist in supporting childcare outdoors and the needs that early childhood educators, licensing officers, and others identify to help them overcome these challenges. 2 significant challenges that we've identified are fear of children getting hurt or otherwise harmed during their time outdoors, and early childhood educators feeling like they lack the skills to take children outside safely. To that end, we've worked with early childhood education professionals to develop tools for educators to help overcome these challenges. And this is the second insight that I want to share with you. One tool that I think you need to all know about was created by with Tim Gill and the Child and Nature Alliance of Canada, and it's called the Canadian Risk-Benefit Assessment Framework Toolkit. And it was designed to help educators take a balanced, thoughtful approach to risk and safety in children's outdoor play. It includes practical advice, forms, and checklists that were all reviewed, actually, incidentally, by Aaron Bookman, who was on last week, the lawyer, insurance providers, municipal risk assessors, educators, and others. Another tool I wanted to share with you is an online training tool for early childhood educators that helps tackle head-on some of the biggest fears and worries, such as, and provides guided mentorship for overcoming these fears and worries and building a concrete plan for action. So it's currently in the testing form, and the final form will be released in mid-November. Now, both of these tools and so much more can be accessed on the Outdoor Play Canada website on the resource page. So I'd encourage you to go have a look at those. My final insight comes from my injury prevention lens. Outdoor-based childcare is already happening outside the regulatory framework of licensing, as we heard from Belva's opening. I see the critical importance of supporting licensing of outdoor childcare to ensure that it meets the minimal standards set by the provincial government so that we can improve access to important training of educators in risk-benefit assessment, and so that we can increase equitable access to this kind of care for our diverse population. Childcare centers have a critical importance as a venue for supporting children's outdoor play and learning. For many kids, these may be the best opportunities they have of being outdoors and benefiting from these experiences. This is particularly fundamental at this time of COVID-19, as the evidence unequivocally indicates a much lower rate of transmission outdoors, leading the BC CDC and the Public Health Agency of Canada to recommend being outdoors as much as possible, particularly also in early childhood education contexts. We know that high quality early child education pays off in dividends throughout people's lives. And so providing this for our children needs to be an important focus for our work. That means working to remove as many of the barriers as we can so that early childhood educators can make the outdoors the center of their childcare routine and pedagogy. We have an opportunity in BC to move forwards toward licensing outdoor early childhood education and to foster change that can make such a significant difference in children's lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariana. And Liz, I wonder if I could ask you for your 3 key insights that you might share.
Good morning, everybody. I'd just like to take you maybe for a little walk on what our programs look like in our community. As I mentioned, I'm a daycare manager, and I'm also a principal of a elementary school that goes to grade 7, so ages around 3 to 12. We focus on a multi-age teaching and passing down our Gitksen knowledge to the next generation, which the Gitksen people believe is our responsibility. I find that in this time of COVID, we've taken a look at what we've done in the past and what our experiences are. I started working on the land with programs from our early years to the grades in school since 1989, so that's about 31 years. And I've also become an early childhood educator in 1997, so around 27 years. So throughout my practice, over the years and my experiences being on the land is that it's really knowledge-based from adults, the transmission to our children and our families, that we reach out to one another and find ways of being outdoors. We have a fenced-in yard. We have a little smokehouse in our yard where we practice doing our traditional smoking of our fish and our moose meat, our ulkins, where we would bring our older students to the smokehouse to be the type of role models to our young ones in the activities that we're doing. So they would be like coming for a visit to our yard. And we are practicing our ways of being with our children and families. So this makes it, the teachings are real and the experiences that we're passing down are relevant to the to us as a Gitksen people. Having the fenced-in area and a lot of outdoors this year since COVID started, we have been outdoors, I would say 75% of the time, and indoors mainly for washing, washrooms, and having our lunch and resting time, and then back outdoors again. This allows us to practice, I believe, for going out onto our territories, which we are learning about this month, is we will be heading out to a local territory, inviting our children and families to come out on a hunting trip, and we will be camping on the land for 3 days. So this is, of course, they have to have an immediate family participate. If their parents are working, we invite either their grandparents or their aunt or their uncle, which is also a part of our tradition, that they help with the teachings of our children. So the family is very important. Through being outdoors, I've noticed it's not only a peace of mind for the children, but it's also a peace of mind for our staff. There's less sanitization, and there's less of that institutional feeling where we have to be so rigid and afraid of this virus. And so it's physically and mentally, I'm finding that, and spiritually, because when we go outdoors in the morning, you know, there's such that calmness, and the children are calm, the staff are calm, and we're ready to begin the day with one another outdoors. So the healing that happens as well. So is so amazing to witness at this time, when there's so much what you call it, everybody's afraid of this virus, and they're so, you know, afraid to be outdoors, or to be, you know, to go shopping, or, you know, to even go to school. So we're finding ways to create safe environments for our children. And in our community, it's all relevant. We have the mountains around us, the trees, the river. So to me, it only makes sense, and we've been doing it for hundreds and thousands of years, that we have great ancestors and great elders here that guide us and that continue with our language on the land, and the learning about the animals and the fish around us, and, you know, the birds, the moose, is so relevant to our children, that they will be learning lifelong skills for, you know, the ways of being on the land as a Gitksen person. So that's what I found within this COVID time, being out on the land, the garden, everything just is all coming together. I believe that it's a really great time and place for our children right now, considering where we've come from in the past. Being a residential school survivor myself, to witness the heartaches that I had as a child, and now witnessing our children being able to have this wonderful opportunity to be on the land and to learn about who they are as a Gitksen person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Tricia, can I turn it to you for your 3 key insights?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So my name is Tricia Edgar, and I'm the director of a program called Fresh Air Learning, which is a forest school in the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish and the Musqueam First Nations. And the question that was asked was, what does outdoor early childhood education look like in our context, and why is it needed? So I wanted to talk about 3 areas that touch on a few of the things that Mariana and Liz already spoke about. I'd like to talk about health and equity and community. And these are supports that we need, and they're things that we think about every day at Forest School. And even though our programs are often considered to be environmental or outdoor programs, a lot of the outcomes are not only ecological, but they're social. So I chose to speak about that today. So I wanted to talk first about issues of health. And I'm a member of the chronic illness and disability community myself, so that's something I'm particularly conscious of, and particularly thinking about the needs of children who might have different or diverse physical needs. Often we think about the outdoors as a place with fresh air that can improve children's immune systems, but I want to think beyond that as well. I want to think about the feeling of health that you get when you know that climbing the stairs in that park was difficult for you at the beginning of the year, and now you can put your backpack on and you can climb those stairs, and you see yourself as a strong and competent person. And that's a story that a lot of people have told me about their children in our program, is that their children feel like they're strong and they're healthy and they're resilient people. And the other element of health that comes up a lot, especially during COVID times, is the social emotional aspect of health. And in part because of connection with the land, and in part because of our specific forest school pedagogy, we feel that children really, really thrive in our program socially and emotionally. The land accepts the kids as they are. It allows them to explore whatever they're curious about, to connect with that slug or to that mud puddle. It allows them to ask questions and solve problems. And when we're outside on the land together, we're able to work together to solve those problems and develop a community of problem solvers. And I've heard from a lot of kids who might have experienced bullying, who might have experienced trauma, or maybe they're neurodiverse. And I hear from them that this is the place, this is the community, and this is the land where they realized that they could have friends. And I've heard children tell me that I didn't know that I had friends until I came here, or that I'm a person who can have friends. And I think that right now, particularly when we can feel isolated, that having that feeling of community and social emotional health is so, so very important. So as we move forward, thinking about developing those health and risk assessment practices that allow practitioners to work towards an environment of appropriate risks and developing that positive environment for social emotional health is really key. The second point I wanted to talk about is equity. And licensing early childhood education will help address issues of equity, and it also brings those issues to light. For us, we're not a licensed program, we're an outdoor program. And so should we become licensed, if we had that ability, that would allow us to increase childcare spaces, to increase programming that is full day care, because many families require that, and also to access things like funding for families, because I think I saw Elizabeth mentioning in the chat that yes, it's very hard for these programs to be financially equitable, especially when we have to have a really great ratio when we're outside with kids. And I also wanted to talk briefly about equity in other ways. So some things to think about as we move into training more practitioners in this area, bringing more people in, is thinking about how do we involve everyone in outdoor education. I kind of look like the typical face in many ways of outdoor learning, but that shouldn't be the case. The outdoors is for everyone, and it's for every child, and it's for every educator. So how do we create opportunities for people to see themselves as outdoor educators and as outdoor learners? And finally, the last equity issue that I wanted to speak about is thinking about how Forest School and the land welcome all children. So we've seen our program as a place for non-binary, gender fluid, and trans children to really thrive, and for neurodiverse children and families, because they're asked, how do you want to play? How do you want to be in our program? And Forest School and land-based learning is a place that really accepts and celebrates children where they're at. And the last thing I wanted to mention, and something that Liz spoke about, is this time as a time to consciously build community. And land-based learning is a wonderful way to build community, not just between people and people, but also between people and place. And this is a time of pandemic, it's a time of forest fires, it's a time of climate change, it's a time of a lot of challenges. And during that time, it's even more important to build that community. We need to think about moving beyond the idea that we as outdoor educators are using land to thinking about ourselves as people who are growing stewards and growing connection and creating a land-based community and a land-based culture, a culture that really, really, truly values land and all of the people who are in that place. So those are the three things that I wanted to bring up as we move forward, the issues of health, equity, and community building that we must consider as we embark on this journey of licensing outdoor programs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tricia. Shelley, can I turn over to you?
Thank you very much. And I'm really delighted to be here with all of you and so excited to be part of this group that is trying very hard to advance nature-based childcare to become licensed in the province of British Columbia. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the traditional territory of the Sunemo First Nation. So as Liz and Mariana and Tricia mentioned, all children in British Columbia deserve to be in licensed childcare. And in fact, one of the goals of the BC Childcare Plan is that they are. So that's one of my first key insights, is that for more than 3 decades, the literature has been very consistent licensed childcare is one facet of quality. The Community Care and Assisted Living Act, the Childcare Licensing Regulations, and the Director of Licensing Standards of Practice are minimal standards. They're designed to minimize the likelihood of harm coming to children in licensed childcare. We know that in British Columbia, there are nature-based childcare operations occurring, and they're unregulated. Additionally, we know that early childhood education does not require indoor facilities. And we've heard from researchers, and we've heard from several other table panelists from the United States and Europe, that quality outdoor early childhood education is sustainable, and it enriches the well-being of children, families, and communities. That changes the trajectory of our world. That's very exciting. The second point is licensing outdoor early childhood education in BC is another mechanism for enhancing childcare spaces. So there's been a need for increased spaces in the province for more than a decade. Enabling legislation to meet this need will allow families to access the affordable childcare benefit funding. It will enable operators to access provincial grants, and it will meet the needs of families who are looking for this type of care, further improving the educational, cognitive, emotional, physical, and social benefits of children. We know that increased outdoor time improves the healthy development and well-being of children, and it synchronizes with many standards in current childcare regulations, such as Section 43, Opportunities for Growth, 44, Programs of Activities, the Director's Standards of Practice, Active Play, and Schedule G, Program of Activities. Is from a regulatory perspective, is outdoor nature childcare supports. Sorry, my internet is a little bit unstable here. Supports the health, safety, and well-being of children in licensed childcare. And many countries, including Washington State, have gained positive attention during the pandemic, as outdoor time enables greater physical distancing, alleviating the concerns associated with indoor closed spaces. We also know that natural environments ground children and adults. Nature-based childcare is one antidote for reducing anxiety in children, educators, and families. Nature-based childcare can help reduce the increase of pandemic stress and increase the wellness of a child for their lifetime. So really, quality early childhood education does not require indoor facilities, and outdoor environments can help to mitigate COVID-19 transmission. As Mariana said, the BC CDC recommends having children outside more often, as does the licensing regulations. And if there ever was a time to disrupt the current system, it's now. The beauty in outdoor nature's childcare is it can unite the current early childhood standards, minimal legislation, the British Columbia Early Learning Framework, as well as the Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Framework, providing educational opportunities and school readiness for all children in British Columbia. It can improve the overall health and wellness across the lifespan. As with all licensed childcare programs, outdoor nature schools can holistically support children, families, communities, and that will better our world. And it will start right in our province of British Columbia.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I feel like jumping up and yelling "hear, hear" after each of our panelists this morning. I really appreciate your concepts and ideas and encouragements. And I wonder, as you listen across each other and the points that you're each making, what meaningful ideas are emerging for you as you're listening? Tricia, could I ask you that?
Absolutely. So as everyone was speaking, I was taking a few notes just about things that came up for me. And one thing that I often start with educators is tapping into their memories of outdoor play as children. And over the years, I've realized that not everyone has those memories of outdoor play. And Liz talked about developing those real experiences and connecting people to the land through that, using a smokehouse, for example, and being in the mountains. And as educators, we tend to treat our own childhood experiences as a baseline. And so I think that when we're bringing these children into outdoor education, we can not only think of the children's wellness, but we can think of how are we creating this land-based culture? How will those children mentor their children? And so creating these memories and experiences of childhood play in nature is really key, as Shelley just mentioned, to creating that disruption in our culture that reconnects us to land. So I was really inspired by that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tricia. Mariana, what ideas are catching your attention?
Oh, it's been it's fascinating, even last half hour. Thank you to my fellow speakers for all this. And there were a few things that really jumped out at me that came out, I think of all three, but in particular, Liz, you said a phrase that stuck with me, which was healing in a time of fear, and how important that time outdoors was for that, and how that provided the opportunity to build community, to involve families. And Tricia, you mentioned how the land accepts people and children as they are. And so this fostering of healing, of reducing anxiety, of feeling like they're fine just the way they are, that they don't need to change, and that in fact those experiences can help build them up and develop that confidence and resilience that is so important for keeping them going in this time, as well as throughout their entire life. So for me, it really, that was very much a compelling narrative throughout what I heard. And I really liked how Shelley just forced us to think about how this can look in BC and how we can use this model to better our world for our children. Thanks.
Thanks, Mariana. Liz, what were you hearing?
There's just so much knowledge being shared here today, and I'm really feeling excited for our children and our families that are coming next. I have been thinking what this would look like in terms of licensing, in terms of as well for the rights of Indigenous children and families. How would that play a part in the licensing? And that we value and acknowledge that it's our inherent right to continue and pass down our knowledge from generation to generation. And as I mentioned before, it's our responsibility. And with parents and going back to work or going back to school, there's not always that family connection to the land. So we're building the community that will envision that our rights and our practices are valued in our community. And the self-esteem for children that comes from knowing who they are is something that we need to instill every day in our children. And from being educated as an early childhood educator, we're kind of, throughout the years, I've had to find our own ways of being okay and sharing who we are as Gitksen in our childcare centers or any other First Nations in our centers, that it's okay to bring our practices into that environment, whether it's on the land or in the community is very important to us to make sure that we advocate for our children and our families, just as a lot of the presenters here do, in that we can borrow important points from one another to make this become a reality, that we can share our visions and take a look at the real issues that we may be facing as early childhood educators. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Shelley, what were you hearing as you were listening across?
Well, I heard so many inspiring comments and just enthusiasm and genuine regard for children, families, and changes that could occur in our communities. And that's so inspiring. One of the things that Tricia said that I delighted in, and I think we all should dance in, is that the land accepts children as they are. Wow, that is such a powerful statement. And then, of course, Liz talked about uniting the rights of children with Indigenous culture, and how it can build resilience. Mariana also talked about resources and the healthy development and well-being that can be enhanced outdoors. So I heard that children, families, and communities can benefit from nature-based outdoor childcare. I also heard that by shifting our mental models, we can create a pathway which is innovative and responsive to families in British Columbia, increasing licensed spaces and creating a more equitable and just childcare system that meets all the needs of families in British Columbia. I heard from panelists. And then I also heard that we have an opportunity to be responsive to COVID-19 and make a difference in the lives of children, including fostering budding naturalists and environmentalists and advocating for lifelong wellness. I mean, each of the panelists spoke about or teased us a bit about their own journey of how nature influenced them. And certainly I know as a child, I spent hours and hours outside. And as an adult, when I really need to get grounded, I put my feet on the ground and put my hands in the air and just wait for nature to wrap themselves around me and give me a sense of purpose and well-being. So that's what I heard today as I listened.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I don't know if everyone's feeling this way, but I can't stop myself from writing down all the amazing quotes people are saying that I want to hold on to. I really appreciate that from all of the panelists. We had some questions that have been shared in advance of this roundtable, and I wondered if I could move into some of those with you now. And Mariana, I'll start with you. One of these questions is, there are at least two competing discourses about risk, and you mentioned risk in your introductory statement. One sees risk as avoiding hazards and harm, and the other sees risk as healthy and important to resilience and regulation. How might we harmonize and normalize the idea of risk as part of play?
Yeah, great question. It's something I spend a lot of my time on within the realm of injury prevention and public health. And certainly the narrative in injury prevention has been risk equating to danger or hazard, very much a negative outcome. And what that's done is not recognize that risk is actually a neutral term, so that it can lead to positive or negative outcomes. And so the positive side of things was the other kind of discourse you were talking about. Risk is necessary for health and development and resilience and so on. And so what I've strived to do in my own work is to try and neutralize the term as much as possible, and make make it really clear that both positive and negative outcomes are possible, but that there's lots that we can do, in terms of what we know, for example, about risk-benefit assessment, to be able to mitigate some of the hazards, so that kids can really be able to, explore their environment, explore the beauties of nature, and so on, in a way that that won't be likely to lead to serious injuries. And also, I think what I've tried to point out in my own work is that while the fear of injury has loomed large, in terms of not only our regulatory framework, but also everyday educators wanting to keep those, precious children in their care safe and as safe as possible. But what we know, first of all, is that we should focus on keeping kids as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. So that they do need to be able to access those opportunities to make decisions for themselves around risk and risk management. And so that, hence we've been creating these tools that can help educators strike that balance and make sure that kids can still have meaningful experiences with risk. Oh, you're muted, Ellen.
So sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariana, for both things. And Liz, what might you share from your experiences on the land with other programs that are hoping to move outdoors?
I was just thinking as well about how at times when we're preparing to go on the land, we would be thinking prior to heading out on our territories. We would be practicing prior to going out on our territories of what may happen, and that we would ensure that our children had a leader per smaller groups that would keep an eye on certain children in different areas, follow them, maybe even document, their experiences and what they may be seeing, how they're reacting to the land. So I think that having our families involved in what we're doing makes a big difference. Ensuring that they have the information prior to us heading out on the land, and just keeping them involved, I think, is very important. And we find that the teachings and the ways of being on the land just seem to be a natural atmosphere in the environment for all of us. And yeah, I just think that the risk taking that was mentioned is obviously, it happens daily, and for sure they're either positive or negative, but having the caregivers there that will ensure the child that it's okay, or making the next proper maybe on what will happen in terms of rectifying the risks if they were negative. There's just so much that we're learning every day from our children, and I think that's important to take into consideration being on the land as well, is to have that documentation and build on there. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Tricia, we're thinking about all the different contexts in which these experiences occur. And one of the questions is, what are some of the issues that face outdoor early childhood education programs that are either in or near really large urban centers?
Mm-hmm. And I was noticing actually on the chat, there were a few people who'd asked questions in that regard. And we do operate our programs in a really large urban center, that being Vancouver. And our locations that we visit are really diverse. And often, and I know Belva could probably say something similar. She was speaking about her programs at the beginning. Often it's that access to nearby nature that we're looking for. That's been spoken about a lot in the past, that children don't necessarily connect with the place that they go to once. If this is a fantastic wilderness area that they go to and commute to once, but they connect to the places that they're at all of the time. So having the challenge and opportunity of urban spaces is finding those spaces that children can be in and connect to over time on a daily basis. And when I'm working with urban forest school educators, sometimes we're talking about little grassy parks. Sometimes we're talking about creating urban gardens or accessing community gardens. So I think issues of access to land are huge in urban spaces. And there are definitely, someone mentioned the unique risks that we face in urban centers. And for sure, things like, unfortunately, like drug paraphernalia are an issue. And so we're having to create processes to address that and to do that risk assessment and to teach our kids what those things look like and to choose spaces that are appropriate for our kids to visit and having connections to local folks who are taking care of parks so that we can make sure that we work together to take care of those spaces. And then finally, I think the third issue that we face, particularly in urban centers, particularly in parts of urban centers that don't have a lot of parks, is just the overwhelming enthusiasm of people to be in parks and the resulting impacts that that can have. So something that I talk with a lot with educators is not just how can we use this space, but how can we be in this space as a steward, and how can we not only assess our impact on the space, but think about how do we contribute to this place? And how do we become a positive force in this place? And with cities around the Metro Vancouver area looking at this increase in folks accessing parks, I think it's especially important to come in with that attitude, not how do we take from, but how do we give to and create a relationship with these urban places.
Thanks so much, Tricia. And Shelley, you know, being a seasoned early childhood education childcare licensing officer and now a senior administrator for the early childhood education licensing officers, I was wondering how you see licensing supporting programs to feel more comfortable outside.
Well, thank you for that question. I think one of the gifts is that licensing officers can work in partnership with educators and facility colleagues to provide information on how to maximize outcome-based legislation and also prescriptive legislation so that facilities operations can be successful. Additionally, I think there's a lot that we can learn from Scotland with their very outcome-based legislation, Washington that has designed standards that are both prescriptive and outcome-based. We know that there's additional places like Denmark that has revised their legislation. And so there's an opportunity for our licensing officers to, and in Island Health in particular, we have adopted a coach approach where we come from a place of inquiry. How can we help operators feel confident in the decisions that they are making to protect children in licensed childcare facilities and enhance their well-being? It's such a wonderful opportunity. So I think from a regulatory point of view, it's really about changing our mental model. And I loved what Mariana's talked about today about risk. I know that when I first heard about risky play about 4 years ago, I went all spiny. And now I'm one of the first to really think, I held on to a perspective that language influenced. And when I suspended that perspective and got curious, I was able to learn so much more that influenced my trajectory of learning, but also my belief and enhancement of how I could interact with others. So I think that's one of our roles as licensing officers and as regulatory practitioners is to partner with early childhood educators and experts in the field to know that collective wisdom is what is going to change the trajectory of our world in the 21st century. We cannot do it in isolation of one another.
Thank you so much, Shelley. I know that Hart has been very actively monitoring the chat, the robust chat that's been occurring while each of you as panelists has been speaking. And Hart, I wonder if there's a question that you see emerging across the chat that you could now share with one of the panelists.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Ellen. One question that has come up in various iterations is around what are you actually doing outdoors? And perhaps Tricia and maybe Liz and Belva could speak a little bit about the actual thing. You arrive at 8, what's happening? Give us a little bit of a sense, please.
Sure, that sounds good. Thank you. Yes, it's the mysterious magic of forest school. What actually happens? So for us, what actually happens during a day depends in part on who we're working with. We have programs for ages 2 to 13, and some of them are connected with the school district. So similar to possibly Liz's programs, we're also in those programs having to think about learning outcomes as well. At a preschool level, a lot of what happens is a general framework that we hold. And within that framework, the children have a huge amount of say about what's going on. So we might meet and have a circle and have a song or a rhyme and a story. And then we spend a lot of time journeying to wherever we're going to go. And the kids spend a lot of time exploring along the way. That might mean, for example, in one of the parks, there's a tunnel where some water flows through, and they might spend some time playing in that water and watching things go through the tunnel. And then when we get to our space, we often have a story and a snack. We do, for hygiene, we like to all make sure that we wash our hands together. And during that time, the teacher might also send out some invitations to the kids. So perhaps the teacher has noticed on previous days that the children are really into birds. So they might bring out some bird's nests for the children to explore or practice doing some bird calls. And all of those things are choice-based. So in forest school pedagogy, and this is one of many outdoor learning pedagogies, the children are the designers of their own learning, and the teachers are learning from the children in terms of what they would like to do and how they can support them in their learning. So often that big piece of being in a place involves imaginative play, explorations of different areas, stewardship activities, maybe some things that the teacher has offered. Belva is offering a wonderful dyeing activity for one of our classes, dyeing with natural dyes. And so a whole mishmash, and it really depends on the individual group. There are many activity books, definitely, for going outside, but a lot of our inspiration is drawn from the children, and then we bring in those activities based on what their needs are.
Thank you, Tricia. Liz, did you want to add to that question?
Our children arrive through parent drop-offs, or else we have transportation provided every morning. They come to the, call it the language nest. So within our language nest, we've had funding where we have a resident grandmother and a resident uncle that are also a part of the program with our 2 early childhood educators. So as they arrive, they would be offered food, greeted in the language, and then once everybody's arrived indoors, then they would all have their breakfast or whatever, and just a time to visit one another. So it's pretty much a natural environment. After that's done, they all go to a little living room and all find their muddy buddies and their boots and everything and get ready to go outdoors. And so we, like I mentioned, we have our fenced in outdoors, and we've created little gazebos, and the grandmother wanted some stumps in a circle for whatever she might want to do with the children in the morning. whether it's a song or she's going to be bringing out the drum that day to sing. So there's just so much, and also the sand, there's a sandbox, a swing. And 1 week we did do the drying the fish in the smokehouse, which is inside the daycare yard, mostly for protection as well. And also it's become a great learning environment for our community. So the older ones and the adults and the grandparents and uncles would be working on the fish, and the young language nest children would be running around and at their choice come and observe what's going on, put their hands in the water, touch the fish, help clean the fish with a spoon. So there's so much learning that is happening at that time, as an example of how we do our traditional activities on site. And so they would be with us until about 3:30, and they would begin to go home. But as I mentioned, they go inside for washroom use and for lunch, and then back out again. So a majority of the time this year especially has been outdoors, and just a great learning experience for everyone.
Thank you so much, Liz. Hart, is there another kind of question emerging across the chat?
Yes, there are. The next one seems to have to do with costs. There's lots of questions that came in around costs. Costs of materials, costs for insurance, costs for resources for educators, equipment for young children who are coming out in inclement weather or different situations like that. So perhaps, again, the same three panelists, Liz, Belva, Tricia, might speak to some of these cost questions.
I'll jump in. It does cost. So as we talk about inclusion, this is where many families are excluded because of the cost. And in my ideal pipe dream, when outdoor education gets licensed, the government will also provide funding towards families to put towards the cost of gear. There is actually Fresher Learning has an active gear swap page, which I refer my families to, where you can sell your used stuff that is still viable and good. Insurance does cost a pretty penny, but it's worth it. And families will pull together. Like oftentimes I work in tandem with businesses so that they say, sure, you send people to us, we'll give you a discount code so that your families can receive a discount. There are ways around it, but it is in that regard, this outdoor education needs to happen for everybody, but it is an exclusive activity right now based on that cost for gear. So I want funding to go to my families for gear. Thank you.
I just wanted to talk about, in addition to what Belva said, I wanted to talk about the cost of program equipment, because someone mentioned that, resources, program equipment. There are infinite numbers of resources that you could get, and I have way too many of them in my basement library. But I think in terms of things that you need to bring outside, that's actually one of the benefits of outdoor programs. And especially right now with COVID, we're trying to reduce any materials that we're bringing outside. And I did a professional development program a few weeks ago, I guess, and I challenged myself to bring absolutely nothing except for my first aid kit. And it worked fine. We were outside all day and we brought nothing. I would say that the biggest upfront cost that you'll face in managing an outdoor program is probably, in terms of gear for yourself, is probably that first aid kit and things like that. That's definitely something that we spend a substantial amount of money on every year. But aside from that, the number of things that you need to bring is reduced because you have nature. And nature is wonderful and diverse, and you're always connecting to different things that you can explore in nature. So yeah, you don't actually need to bring that many things outside.
Thank you. And Hart, is there one more question? And perhaps while Hart is looking.
I was just pulling up a question. There is another question that I would like to suggest, and it is about shelter. The question is asking, there are days both here in the Lower Mainland and throughout the province where the weather isn't sunny all the time, it isn't warm. How do you deal with this need or perceived need for shelter from inclement weather when you're outdoors all the time?
Maybe Mariana or Shelley, do you have a comment to answer that?
Sorry, so Hart, you're asking what do we do if there's no shelter?
Yeah, so if there's no building and it's wet out or it's cold out, how is shelter addressed?
So, you know, from a regulatory perspective, I think the shelter is using nature-based resources. So what do we use to get shelter in inclement weather? We would use, obviously, going under trees, and our gear for sure is what I imagine children to be wearing. I think Belva and Tricia can speak more to that, but I think, as Liz suggested, that many outdoor programs have shelters that children can go to under, and you know, from a regulatory lens, that would be a question that we would be asking as well. How do we keep children warm and safe and meet the diverse needs of all children that are outside? Because some children will be more resilient to weather changes and others won't. But my perspective about it is like any equipment, that children would need to have the appropriate equipment to navigate the weather and the terrain that they're participating in. But I'm thinking that perhaps Belva and Tricia, who have more experience with it, could talk about it, because certainly our panelists from Washington illuminated that it is possible. So did Denmark, and so did Scotland. We know that Colorado and Michigan State also have outdoor programs, and they have much more inclement weather than Vancouver Island or the province of British Columbia for most part.
I'll jump in again. So in my world, my programs are only 3 hours long. So we're not outside, you know, we're outside long enough, and it's long enough. Sometimes it's not enough, actually. The thing to remember is that children are not sugar cubes. They won't melt if it rains. And if they have the layers, if they have the wool tights and the fleece tights and the rain gear, they're actually happy. You know, there's no such thing as bad weather. There's just bad clothing. We do pitch ourselves underneath trees. It's a wonderful teaching moment when you sit underneath a giant cedar tree and you're dry and it is pouring rain outside. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about how old the tree is, how big it is, how tall it is, how it helps and protects us. And then we all hug the tree and say thank you. We will set up tarps, which is its own hilarity because it depends on what you're setting them up under, but there are ways around it. And we do have strategies to help children stay warm and all of those things, which is a whole nother topic. But Tricia, what would you like to add into this?
I think you've covered a lot of that. We do try to operate in places where we can access an emergency shelter. And those emergency shelters are primarily if there's a lot of wet snow and we notice that a lot of branches are breaking and we need to go under a roof, or thunder and lightning storm or something like that. So normally we're not using our emergency shelters on a regular basis. They're just there for our personal feeling of security. And sometimes we set up tarps. Sometimes setting up tarps discourages children from moving. So we like to make sure that we change the activities that the children are doing so that we can move our bodies and stay warm and have that gear. And that's how we stay warm, is not necessarily moving under something to be still. We do that when we're eating, but also moving our bodies and also just enjoying whatever is happening that day. So sometimes the day can be pouring rain. The first day of our Jericho class, full day Jericho class this year, was pouring rain, and the children had a wonderful time, and they all came home completely wet and muddy and had a great time jumping in the puddles. So yeah, it's sometimes it's an adult perspective on weather as well. It's a real thing, but if the children have gear, again, which also needs funding, then they often just have a glorious time.
Thank you so much, Tricia. Thank you to all the panelists. You can see each of these questions is so rich. We could explore them all in a single roundtable for each of them. Belva started us off this morning with a really important question. You know, she said, how can we move licensing outdoor early childhood education forward in BC now? How do we do that? And I wondered if I could ask each of the panelists to summarize maybe one or two important considerations to help BC move forward with licensing outdoor early childhood education now. And Mariana, could I start with you?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Helen. So in my experience in research and training and the advocacy work that I've done in early childhood, I've come across a lot of yeah buts, and we've been hearing some of them here today as well. This kind of, yeah, sure, I understand it's important, but what about, you know, fill in the blank? But I've also been fortunate to come across a multitude of examples in Canada and abroad, and we have some of the panelists here with us today, where they figured out ways to overcome those barriers and to allow children to enjoy access to very high quality outdoor early childhood education. So from my end, I do the research, and the research to support it is vast. The tools for training are available, and more are coming online regularly. And the will to provide a pathway forward for licensing outdoor early childhood education is there and growing. And it's growing among educators, among parents, licensing officers, and public health, and all sorts of sectors. So it's time for us to look beyond the yeah buts towards, I'd like to be part of this journey, and how can I contribute? And we all need to understand that we are all part of this journey, that it's going to take all of us as a community to move this issue forward. So over the course of our roundtable sessions, we've had incredible opportunities to hear from Indigenous elders, policymakers, early childhood educators, researchers, lawyers. So much wealth of expertise that's out there and available. And they're so willing to share their experiences and how to make this happen. We have an incredible opportunity in BC right now to move towards licensing outdoor early childhood education and to foster that change, to make that really important difference in the lives of our children that will set them up for the future, as well as in the lives of our families and community. So I guess my point really is that we all need to see ourselves as part of this journey, and that we can all play a role in moving it forward and kind of expanding our thinking to see how that can be made possible.
Thank you, Mariana. Liz, how would you answer that question?
I think that in terms of the moving forward, is that we need to begin to make an acceptance of all peoples and all programming, and to understand that we will all be in different places and different environments, and how do we do that balance for all to be inclusive in the licensing process. And just to ensure that the collaboration is amongst not only those that are and will be assisting in the licensing policies, but to also include communities in the process as well. That will ensure that we all move forward with a good understanding of what our dreams are and our visions are for our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Tricia.
Liz, I think you took the words that I was going to say and said them much more beautifully. That's what I was going to point out, is just that we have wonderful resources. We have wonderful policies that are already available in different jurisdictions, existing outdoor ECE programs, land-based learning programs, the Child and Nature Alliance, the Washington State experiences, and all of these things can inform what we do. But that it's critically important to listen to the diversity of voices out there. And I saw in the chat today, I saw questions about, well, how does this work with my program? How does this work with full day childcare or in-home childcare? And how does this work in Indigenous communities? And so all of these things, our programs are so diverse, our children are so diverse, and our spaces are so diverse. And that is a huge strength of forest and land-based programs. And so we don't want to lose that as we move forward. And it's really, really important to learn from practice, from practitioners. I love the fact that Washington has been learning from their pilot programs, and not only from learning from the pilot programs and how they work for children, but learning from people who are in the field who might need to take further education, for example, and how does that education work, and how does it sit with people, and how do we change that over time? So listening to diverse voices, learning from practice, and then having that ongoing practice of listening and making sure that this isn't a static process, that we're always listening, we're always evolving, we're always curious. And I think that this type of licensing and these sorts of programs can have such a profound impact on children, and that it can impact not only the children now, but the children for many, many generations to come. And so I definitely encourage this sort of support for these programs, and also that kind of dynamic listening to parents and children and educators. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. And to you, Shelley.
Well, thank you. You know, as I shared, I think it's such an exciting time. And as each of the panelists said, we're surrounded by solution builders, and we need to be solution builders. The answers are within the province of British Columbia. They're within our neighboring countries. We can do this. So I encourage everyone to agitate the government of British Columbia to convene a BC Outdoor Early Childhood Education Advisory Committee to bring together qualified early childhood educators from licensed and unlicensed early childhood programs with a focus on with an outdoor focus. Also, researchers who study the benefits of outdoor learning for young children, licensing officers, policymakers, public health officials, and Indigenous people. I think that we need to create another category of care to enable outdoor nature schools to be licensed in British Columbia within the next several months. We can develop standards for outdoor EC programs, so legislation that is specific to BC, including staff qualifications, policies and procedures, Indigenous knowledge and experiences and narratives. And we can incorporate and unite all the tools that we already have, but and we can start to facilitate workshops and conversations for educators and community partners to increase their knowledge and their comfort and their understanding. I have a belief that every single person can see some benefit of nature-based childcare and can champion this opportunity, because the opportunity is now. And if it's not now, we have to ask when. We have the how, the what, the where, the why, and what's missing is when. When And from my perspective, and certainly from the privilege of working with this committee and licensees and educators and others, is the when is now. And we can make a difference for children, families, and communities. And we need to agitate the system and move this forward because we're ready. I'm ready, and I believe you're ready too.
Thank you so much, Shelley, and thank you so much to all of the panelists for this motivating, empowering moment of now. Belva, can I turn it over to you?
There we go, unmuted. Wow. So I purposely turned off my video because I was like this roller coaster of emotions listening, and I am cheering out loud like, yeah, with so many things that people have said just right now with Shelley. The time is now. Yes, it is now. I think that Liz really capped it in that COVID, being outside in the time of COVID is healing in this time of fear. Our risks are lower outdoors, 100%. And there is so much anxiety. So I've talked to so many parents about their anxieties around COVID, and I have anxieties about it too, but I feel so grateful that I get to be outdoors every day, and I get to be outdoors with all of the children in my programs. There's so many. It's wonderful. A common theme is inclusion. Mother Nature doesn't judge us. She doesn't care what color your hair is. She doesn't care what color your skin is. She doesn't care how tall, how short, where you come from, what your education is. She's just happy you're there. She's just happy you're sitting in her arms. She is this always all accepting being that has always been there. And when we are able to tap into it, and as Shelley says, when I feel ungrounded, I put my feet on the ground, I put my hands in the air, and I just wait for her to wrap herself around me. Life is better. We are more grounded. And that's what we need now more than ever, is to feel grounded. In regards to safety, as Mariana mentioned, it's about keeping children as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. When we allow children the opportunities for risky play to make their own choices about their bodies, they know when it's too high, they know when it's too far. We're teaching them how to trust their intuition, and intuition is a muscle. I can't tell you how high to go because you know your body best. This is such an important thing to keep in mind. It's scarier for us than it is for them. Also, as Mariana mentioned, there are resources out there for educators that are free to access. The Canadian Risk Benefit Toolkit, the beta testing that she's doing now that she'll be launching in November. These are so exciting. These things need to be shared everywhere. The work that Mariana does is valuable and important to what we're doing and advocating for today. The most important thing to remember, and this has come up in our conversations a lot as we've been putting together these roundtables, is legislation is changed as a reaction to a negative occurrence. We are advocating to change legislation as a proactive stance before something happens. That's the key. Because if one bad thing happens in an outdoor program, it tarnishes all of our programs. But if we can work towards creating a set of guidelines and a framework for people to learn what kind of education do they need, what kind of safety parameters, training, workshops, how can we do this? It'll be revolutionary. Yeah. I'm excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Belva, and I'll turn it over now to Enid Elliott.
Okay, well, I just, I want to raise my hands to everyone today. It was lovely, beautiful to hear just this ongoing discussion. So really, thank you to Liz and Mariana and Shelley and Tricia, our panelists, and to Belva for hosting so eloquently, Belva, and always Ellen's steady hand at the helm. I think we've learned a lot over the past 3 weeks. It's been a lot of food for thought. It's been inspiring and illuminating. And I think it starts to point us towards a path that can be beneficial, I think, to our communities, our children, and our families. It's been radiating out in multiple directions. We've had listeners from Iskut, BC, which actually I had to look up because I wasn't sure where that was, and the Okanagan and Kamloops and Prince George and further north. And I think as a team, Hart and Iris, Belva, Shelley, Mariana, we've shared perspectives and insights and hopes as we planned these roundtables. And Ellen shared her hopes for the environment and children with us, adding to our conversation. But we need our larger community. We need help from everyone who has been inspired or moved by these presentations. So how can you help? Because I believe in the intelligence of our communities. I think it's when we put our heads together that we actually can solve problems like, how will we do this? And what various problems in various places can be solved. So when we asked for your ideas, here's what I heard from some of the comments in the side chat, that people thought maybe we need to advocate for better facilities in our parks. And I think maybe we need to also advocate for more green spaces in our urban areas. You know, we need those green spaces. And what about the role of practicum students? Because maybe we need to be encouraging new ECEs to see the outdoors as a place for learning. Creating equitable access to outdoor education. You know, that includes like access for all children, all families, making it affordable. And that some of that has to do with the cost of equipment and outdoor gear. Someone suggested completing a children's charter of rights, you know, with access to nature for a minimum of 1 hour a day. And perhaps connecting these to rights of Indigenous children and families so that, you know, we keep that awareness in our minds. And it's time to disrupt. That kind of kept coming up, you know, and that perhaps these questions encourage us to think critically about this system as it stands now, and what do we want to include? What do we want to add to it? How will we include family daycare? How will we include all children? How will we make everyone more comfortable outdoors? And how do we get to know even more deeply the place in which we are? So it seems like people felt it was a time to share our vision, share our ideas and resources. Someone said, as I reflect on the presentations today, and the ones that were previous, they speak to me in terms of outdoor education being a vehicle towards equalizing and drawing from Indigenous principles of being, of learning and knowing. Someone suggested gathering evidence, research, and programs that work, and lobbying and advocating, maybe through a petition, having curriculum which to present to the province, which shows outdoor education. So how do we see ourselves as part of the world that surrounds us, giving as well as receiving? And someone felt points to consider from Liz, the importance of keeping families involved, Trish, the importance of connecting to places that children return to and building relationship with place. And Shelley, that this being a time to disrupt our previous ways of thinking about early childhood education. And Mariana reminding us that risk is a neutral term that can lead to both positive and negative outcomes. So I urge everyone to take this conversation to your community and speak to your MLA, medical health officers, licensing officers, because I think it's those local conversations and provincial conversations that can help make our communities safe for our children, and that we can think deeply about answers to some of the questions that came up in the chat. And I think some of those answers are local answers and some might be provincial answers. And I think we need to think creatively, because it is possible to go outside with children, and it's possible to have programs that spend most, if not all, the day outside, because we've heard that it benefits children from health perspective. We've heard how it's being done in other countries and to the south of us, and we've heard that it's possible. When we have children outside, connecting with the birds, the wind, and the rain, they're learning to be members of the larger community, the community that includes the life found outside. We all need to listen to those voices. And what better time to start than early childhood? So thank you all for joining us in these 3 weeks of discussions. It's been a wonderful team effort, and as participants, we're really so pleased that you could join us. Thank you. Okay.